There was a sound in the wall, and at first Jonah thought it was nothing more than the old house settling into itself, the way wood sighs and pipes whisper when the night grows heavy. But this sound was different because it came every night at exactly 2:17 a.m., not a second earlier, not a second later, like something inside the walls was keeping time. And after the third night, he stopped pretending it was normal and began lying awake in bed waiting for it, staring at the ceiling as the seconds crawled by until the faint scratching began again, soft and deliberate, like fingernails dragging slowly across the inside of the plaster, and it always lasted for exactly 1 minute before stopping abruptly, as if whatever made the sound knew it had a limit it could not exceed. And during the day the house felt harmless again, full of quiet sunlight and dust motes drifting lazily in the air. But at night it changed, the corners growing deeper, the silence heavier, and Jonah found himself avoiding the hallway where the sound seemed loudest, though he could never pinpoint exactly where it came from, only that it was always just beyond reach, just behind something solid, just out of sight. And after a week, he pressed his ear to the wall at 2:16 a.m., his heart pounding so loudly he worried it would drown out the sound. But then it came again, louder this time, clearer, and beneath the scratching he heard something else, something that made his stomach tighten, a faint rhythmic tapping, like someone knocking from inside, slow and patient, as if waiting for him to answer. And without thinking, he whispered, "Hello," into the wall, and the scratching stopped instantly. The silence that followed so complete it felt unnatural, like the house itself was holding its breath. And then from the other side came a soft whisper, so faint he almost convinced himself he imagined it. But he knew he hadn't, because it spoke his name, not loudly, not urgently, but gently, as though it had known him for a very long time. And Jonah stumbled back, his skin prickling with cold, and told himself it was impossible, that there was no space inside the walls for a person, no hidden room, no passage, nothing but wood and insulation and darkness. And yet the next night he found himself back in the hallway again, waiting, listening, needing to hear it. And when the scratching began, he didn't hesitate this time, pressing his palm flat against the wall and asking who was there, and the whisper came again, clearer now, closer, telling him it had been waiting, telling him it had been alone for so long, telling him that the last one had stopped answering, and Jonah felt a chill run through him, because he remembered what the realtor had said about the previous owner, how he didn't like being alone, and suddenly the cheap price of the house didn't feel like luck anymore. It felt like a warning he had ignored, and he tried to pull his hand away from the wall, but something pressed back from the other side, not hard, not violent, just enough to let him know it was there, matching his hand perfectly finger for finger, as if there was another version of him trapped just inches away, separated by nothing but a thin layer of plaster. And he froze, unable to move, as the whisper grew more urgent, more desperate, asking him to open the wall, asking him to let it out, promising it would be quiet, promising it would be grateful, promising it would never leave him alone again. And Jonah shook his head, even though it couldn't see him, backing away slowly. But the pressure remained for a moment longer before fading, and that night he didn't sleep at all, lying in bed staring at the door, certain that if he looked away for even a second, something would be standing there, watching him, waiting for him to close his eyes. And in the morning he searched the walls, tapping, measuring, looking for any sign of a hollow space. But everything felt solid. Everything looked normal, and he almost convinced himself it had all been a dream until he noticed the faint outline on the hallway wall, a shape that hadn't been there before, the subtle impression of a hand pressed outward from beneath the paint, as if something inside had tried to reach him and left its mark behind. And that night he packed a bag, deciding he would leave, that whatever was in the walls could stay there, that he wanted no part of it. But at 2:17 a.m., the scratching began again, louder than ever, frantic now, accompanied by the knocking faster and harder, and the whisper was no longer gentle, but pleading, begging him not to go, telling him it couldn't stand being alone again, telling him it had already been alone for too long, and Jonah covered his ears. But the sound seemed to come from everywhere now, from the walls, the floor, the ceiling, surrounding him completely, until he couldn't tell where it was strongest, because it was everywhere at once. And then suddenly it stopped, and in the silence that followed, he heard something that made his blood run cold. A sound, not from inside the walls, but from somewhere much closer, a slow creaking just outside his bedroom door, followed by the soft, unmistakable sound of fingers dragging lightly across the wood from the outside, as if whatever had been in the walls had finally found a way out. And then, in a voice no longer muffled or distant, but right there in the room with him, it whispered his name again, this time from just behind his back. There was a sound in the wall, and at first Jonah told himself it was nothing, just the old house, settling the way old houses always did, breathing in slow creaks and sighs, as the temperature dropped and the night pressed in. But the sound did not behave like anything natural, because it came every night at exactly 2:17 a.m., precise and unchanging, as if something unseen were keeping time with a patience that no human possessed. And the first few nights he ignored it, rolling over in bed and pulling the blanket tighter around his shoulders. But ignoring something only works when it fades. And this did not fade. It waited. It returned. It insisted, until he began to wake before it started, his eyes opening to the darkness as if something inside him already knew what was coming. And he would lie there in silence, staring at the faint outline of the ceiling, counting the seconds in his head until the scratching began again. Soft at first, almost polite, like someone testing the surface from the other side, and then growing steadier, more deliberate, like fingernails dragging slowly across plaster, mapping it, learning it. And every time it lasted exactly 1 minute before stopping abruptly, cutting off in a way that felt intentional rather than random, as if it had rules it could not break. During the day, the house felt ordinary, almost comforting in its stillness. Sunlight slipping through the dusty windows, the wooden floors warm beneath his feet. But even then, there were moments when he would pause in the hallway and feel it, a subtle wrongness in the air, as though the house were not empty even when it appeared to be, as though something were standing just out of sight, listening to him the way he had begun listening to it. And after a week, he could no longer ignore the pull of it, the need to understand. And so one night at 2:16 a.m., he stood in the hallway with his ear pressed against the wall where the sound seemed strongest, his heart beating so loudly he feared it might drown everything else out. But when the scratching began, it came through clearly, closer than ever, and beneath it he heard something new, a faint, uneven tapping, like knuckles striking gently from the other side, not in panic, not in violence, but in a slow, patient rhythm, as if something were knocking and waiting for an answer. Without thinking, Jonah whispered, "Hello," his voice barely more than breath against the wall, and the scratching stopped instantly, the silence that followed so complete it felt unnatural, like the entire house had paused to listen. And then from the other side came a whisper so faint he almost convinced himself he imagined it. But he knew he hadn't, because it spoke his name, not loudly, not urgently, but softly, like someone who had been saying it for a very long time. And Jonah stumbled back, his skin tightening with cold, his mind racing for explanations that refused to come, because there was no space inside the walls, no hidden rooms, no reason for a voice to be there, and yet it had known his name. The next night he returned despite himself, drawn by something he could not explain, and when the sound began again, he pressed his hand against the wall, asking who was there, and for a moment nothing happened, and then something pressed back, perfectly aligned with his palm, finger for finger, as though there were another version of him trapped just inches away, separated by nothing but a thin barrier. And the whisper returned, clearer now, telling him it had been waiting, telling him it had been alone, telling him the last one had stopped answering. And Jonah felt a chill spread through him as he remembered the vague comment from the realtor about the previous owner, how he had not liked being alone. And suddenly the cheapness of the house felt less like luck and more like something abandoned. He tried to pull his hand away, but the pressure lingered for a moment longer before slowly fading, as if reluctant to let him go. And that night he did not sleep at all, lying in bed with his eyes fixed on the doorway, convinced that if he looked away even for a second, something would appear there, watching him, waiting. And when morning finally came, he searched the walls, tapping and measuring, looking for any hollow space, any sign that something could exist inside them. But everything felt solid, everything looked normal, and he almost convinced himself it had all been a dream until he noticed the mark, faint but unmistakable, the outline of a hand pressed outward beneath the paint in the hallway wall, as though something inside had tried to reach him and left its shape behind. That night, he decided to leave, packing a bag with shaking hands, telling himself that whatever was in the walls could stay there, that he wanted no part of it. But as the clock crept toward 2:17 a.m., the house seemed to grow quieter, heavier, the silence stretching tight like something about to snap. And when the scratching began, it was no longer soft or careful, but frantic, desperate, the tapping turning into rapid knocking, uneven and urgent, and the whisper was no longer gentle, but pleading, begging him not to go, telling him it could not be alone again, telling him it had waited too long already. He covered his ears, but the sound did not fade, instead seeming to come from everywhere at once, from the walls, the floor, the ceiling, surrounding him completely, until he could no longer tell where it was strongest, because it was all around him, inside the house, inside the space itself. And then suddenly it stopped, cutting off so sharply it left a ringing silence behind, and in that silence he heard something new, something that made his blood turn cold. A slow creak just outside his bedroom door, followed by the soft drag of fingers across the wood, not from inside the walls anymore, but from the hallway itself. Jonah froze, every muscle locked in place as the handle of the door shifted slightly, not turning fully, just enough to show that something on the other side had touched it, tested it, and then the whisper came again, no longer distant or muffled, but clear, right there, just beyond the thin barrier of the door, speaking his name in a voice that sounded almost like his own, only stretched and hollow, as if it had been repeating it for years without ever being answered. He did not move, did not breathe, as the door slowly began to open inch by inch, the darkness beyond it deeper than it should have been, and in that darkness he saw something that made him understand too late what the house really was, because standing there was a figure shaped like him, but not quite right, its movements slightly delayed, its features blurred as if it had been pressed too long against something that would not let it through, and its hand was raised, fingers splayed, matching the mark on the wall exactly. And then it smiled, not with relief, not with kindness, but with something hollow and patient, as if it had always known this moment would come, as if it had been waiting not to escape, but to be let in. And the last thing Jonah heard before the door opened fully was the scratching again, not from the walls this time, but from behind him, inside the room, as if something else had already taken his place. Jonah did not remember moving, but suddenly he was standing in the center of the room, the door wide open, the hallway beyond stretching into a darkness that did not belong to the house he had walked through so many times before, and the figure that stood there, shaped like him but wrong in ways he could not fully describe, tilted its head slightly as if studying him, as if comparing something, and for a moment neither of them moved, the silence thick and suffocating, until Jonah became aware of something behind him, a presence that had not been there before, something standing exactly where he had been moments ago. And when he turned, slowly, afraid of what he might see, the room looked the same and yet not, the corners deeper, the shadows longer, and on the wall where the handprint had been there were now several more, overlapping, layered, as if many hands had pressed outward over time, all trying to reach the same point. The figure in the doorway took a step forward, its movement slightly delayed, like a reflection catching up to the person it mirrored, and Jonah felt his body respond in a way he had not chosen, his foot sliding back across the floor as if pulled by an invisible thread, and he realized with a growing, creeping horror that the thing was not just watching him. It was syncing with him, learning him, matching him piece by piece, and when he raised his hand without thinking, it raised its own a fraction of a second later, the same motion, the same angle, until the delay began to shrink, the difference becoming smaller and smaller as though it were closing the gap between them. "You opened it," the figure said, and its voice was no longer a whisper, no longer distant, but layered, like multiple versions of the same sound speaking at once, some slightly ahead, some slightly behind, creating a distortion that made Jonah's ears ache, and he shook his head instinctively, backing away, but the room behind him seemed to stretch, the walls subtly shifting, the distance to the bed growing longer than it should have been, and for the first time he understood that the house was not simply a place. It was something else, something that bent space the way the thing in the doorway bent time. "I didn't," Jonah said, but his voice sounded thin, uncertain, even to himself, and the figure's smile widened just slightly, not in amusement, but in recognition, as if it had heard those words before many times from many others. "They all say that," it replied, and as it spoke, the scratching began again, not from one place, but from everywhere, inside the walls, beneath the floor, above the ceiling, a chorus of desperate, restless movement, and Jonah realized that the hands on the wall were not marks left behind. They were impressions from things still there, still pressing, still trying. He turned toward the nearest wall, drawn by a sudden, terrible understanding, and placed his hand against it, and immediately something pressed back, not one hand this time, but many, overlapping, shifting, as if several were trying to reach him at once, their shapes sliding against each other beneath the surface, and he recoiled with a gasp. But the sensation lingered in his palm, a cold pressure that did not belong to him. "They don't leave," the figure said, stepping fully into the room now, its movements smoother, more precise, the delay nearly gone. "They stay where they are put." Jonah's mind raced, trying to find logic, reason, anything that made sense of what was happening, but every thought collapsed under the weight of what he was seeing, what he was feeling, and he realized with a sickening clarity that the house had never been empty, not for a moment. It had always been full, filled with things that had once been like him, things that had listened, things that had answered. "What are you?" he whispered. The figure paused, as if considering the question, and then took another step closer, so close now that Jonah could see the details of its face, the slight misalignment of its features, the way its eyes did not reflect light properly, absorbing it instead like holes cut into the shape of a person. "I am what you left behind," it said. The words did not make sense at first, but then something shifted in Jonah's memory, something small and distant, a feeling rather than a clear image, the faint recollection of standing in this same room not days ago, but longer, weeks, maybe more, pressing his hand against the wall, hearing a voice that sounded like his own, and a sudden, crushing realization began to form, too large, too terrible to fully grasp. "No," he said, shaking his head, "that's not possible." But even as he said it, he felt the room change again, subtle at first, the angles slightly off, the air heavier, and he understood that the house was not fixed. It shifted depending on where you stood, on what side you were on, and for a moment he felt disoriented, as if he were both inside the room and outside it, both the one looking and the one being looked at. "You were here before," the figure continued, its voice steady now, almost calm. "You just don't remember it yet." The scratching grew louder, more frantic, and Jonah turned again, his gaze drawn to the walls as faint outlines began to appear beneath the paint, shapes pressing outward, faces now distorted and incomplete, their features blurred but unmistakably human, their mouths open in silent pleas that never reached sound, and he staggered back, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. "This isn't real," he said, but the words felt hollow, meaningless. The figure tilted its head again, mirroring him perfectly now, no delay at all. "It becomes real when you believe it," it said, "and you already do." Jonah wanted to run, to push past it, to get out of the house and never return. But when he looked toward the hallway, the darkness there seemed endless, stretching far beyond the limits of the building, and he knew without knowing how that if he stepped into it, he would not find the outside world, only more of this, more walls, more spaces that did not connect the way they should. "So what happens now?" he asked, his voice barely holding together. The figure smiled again, wider this time, and for a moment its face seemed to flicker, showing something else beneath, something thinner, more strained, like a shape stretched over something that did not quite fit. "Now," it said, "we finish the exchange." Before Jonah could react, the walls around him seemed to lurch inward, the space collapsing slightly, and he felt a sudden pull at his back, as if the room itself were trying to draw him into it, and he stumbled forward instinctively toward the figure, and for a brief, horrifying moment their hands touched, and the sensation was not like touching another person, but like pressing against a surface that gave way just enough to let something pass through. The world twisted. The room vanished. And Jonah found himself standing in darkness, pressed tightly on all sides, unable to move, unable to breathe properly, his arms pinned, his face inches from a surface he could not see but could feel, rough and cold against his skin, and from somewhere beyond it came a sound he now knew all too well, the faint scratching, slow and deliberate, coming from the other side. "No," he tried to say, but the word barely formed. From beyond the wall, from the room that was no longer his, he heard movement, footsteps, calm and steady, followed by his own voice, clear and steady, testing the air as if it belonged there. And then, softly, curiously, as if discovering something new, it said, "There's a sound in the wall." The street was never quiet, not even at night, not even in the hours when the city was supposed to sleep, because in a place that large, silence didn't exist. It only changed shape, becoming distant sirens, humming traffic, footsteps echoing off concrete, and the occasional voice carried too far through the cold air, and that was why Elias hadn't noticed it at first. The extra sound, the one that didn't belong, because in a city like this, there was always something that didn't belong. It started as footsteps. Not unusual footsteps, not loud or rushed, just steady, measured steps that seemed to fall into rhythm with his own as he walked home each night. And the first time he noticed them, he didn't think anything of it, because people walked behind each other all the time, especially in the late hours when the streets thinned out and the distance between strangers shrank. But there was something about the timing that felt off, something too precise, because no matter how fast or slow he walked, the footsteps behind him adjusted perfectly, never gaining, never falling back, always exactly the same distance away. The second night, he tested it. He stopped suddenly in the middle of the sidewalk, pretending to check his phone. And the footsteps behind him stopped too, not a moment later, not a hesitation, just instantly, as if they had been waiting for him to decide. And when he turned to look, there was no one there, just the long stretch of empty street, lit by flickering lamps and the faint glow of apartment windows above. He laughed it off then, quietly, shaking his head at himself, because cities played tricks on people. The noise, the lights, the constant movement, it wore you down until your brain started filling in gaps that weren't really there. But the footsteps came back the next night, and the night after that, always when he took the same route home, always on the same stretch of street, between the closed cafe on the corner and the long row of shuttered storefronts. Always when there was no one else around to explain it, and slowly, without realizing it, Elias began to change his habits, walking faster, taking different turns, crossing the street at random points. But it didn't matter, because the footsteps always found him again, always matched him again, as if they didn't follow the street, but him. One night, out of frustration more than fear, he spoke. "I know you're there," he said, not turning around, his voice echoing slightly in the empty space. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed felt wrong, heavier than it should have been, like the city itself had paused to listen. Then, after a moment, the footsteps resumed. But this time, they were closer. Elias didn't run, not yet, because running would mean admitting something was wrong, and he wasn't ready to do that. So he kept walking, forcing his pace to stay steady, even as his chest tightened and his ears strained to track every sound behind him, every subtle shift in distance, until he reached his building and stepped inside. the door closing with a solid, reassuring thud that cut the sound off completely. Inside, everything was normal. Too normal. The hum of the elevator, the distant murmur of a television from another apartment, the soft buzz of overhead lights, all of it grounded him again, made the outside feel distant, unreal, like something that couldn't cross the threshold. But the next night proved him wrong, because the footsteps started earlier. Not on the empty stretch of street this time, but the moment he turned onto his block, blending seamlessly with the scattered sounds of the city, slipping between them so easily that he almost missed them, and when he reached the familiar stretch, the place where he had first noticed them, they didn't just follow. They synced perfectly, step for step, left for left, right for right, like a mirror that didn't need light. He stopped again. They stopped. He took a single step backward. They did too. And for the first time, Elias felt something cold settle in his chest, something that wasn't fear exactly, but recognition, like he was beginning to understand a pattern he didn't want to see. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. For a long moment, nothing answered. Then, softly, from somewhere directly behind him, so close he could feel the faint shift of air, a voice spoke. "I'm trying to keep up." Elias spun around. No one. Just the empty street, the flickering light, the endless rows of windows staring down like blind eyes. But the voice had been real. He knew it had been real. From that night on, the city changed. Not visibly, not in any way he could explain to someone else, but in the way it felt, in the way the spaces between things seemed to stretch just a little too far, in the way reflections in dark windows didn't always line up perfectly with his movements, lagging for a fraction of a second before correcting themselves, and the footsteps never stopped now, not even when other people were around, not even in crowded areas where they should have been lost completely, because no matter how many other sounds filled the space, he could always pick them out, always hear that same steady rhythm just behind him. Closer each night. One evening, as he passed a darkened storefront, he caught his reflection in the glass, and something about it made him stop. It was him, but not quite. The posture was slightly off, the head tilted at an angle he wasn't holding, the eyes fixed not forward, but directly at him, and as he stared, frozen, the reflection moved a fraction of a second too late, correcting itself into alignment, as if it had been caught doing something it shouldn't. And behind him, in the reflection, there was something else. A shape. Faint. Close. Matching his outline almost perfectly, but not fully solid, like a shadow that had learned how to stand. He didn't turn around this time. He didn't want to see it directly, because somehow he knew that if he did, it would be closer than it had ever been before. "I'm almost there," the voice whispered, right behind his ear. Elias ran. This time he didn't hesitate, his footsteps pounding against the pavement, echoing loudly through the empty street, but the sound behind him didn't fall away. It matched him. Perfectly. Faster. Closer. Until he couldn't tell which steps were his anymore. He reached his building, fumbled with the door, nearly dropping his keys, and slammed it shut behind him, leaning against it, breathing hard, listening. Silence for a moment. Then a single step from the other side of the door. Not outside, inside the hallway. Elias's breath caught in his throat as he slowly turned his head. The hallway was empty, but the elevator light flickered on, and the sound came again. One step, then another, perfectly matching the rhythm he had just run. "I made it," the voice said softly, now no longer behind him, no longer distant, but somewhere within the building itself, within the same space, within reach. Elias backed away slowly, his eyes fixed on the far end of the hallway where the shadows seemed just a little too deep. And as the light flickered again, he saw it for a split second. A figure, standing exactly the way he stood, breathing exactly the way he breathed, waiting for him to move, so it could follow, so it could learn, so it could finally stop being behind him and start being him. Elias didn't move at first because moving meant continuing whatever this was, and some instinct told him that every step he took now mattered in a way it hadn't before, that whatever had been following him was no longer just learning his rhythm, but waiting for something more specific, something final. And the hallway seemed to stretch as he stared down it, the far wall slightly farther away than it should have been, the flickering light above humming in a way that felt almost deliberate, as if it were marking time for something he couldn't yet see. The elevator door slid open with a soft mechanical sigh. No one stepped out, but the interior light flickered twice, slow and uneven, and for a brief moment Elias saw a reflection in the polished metal walls, not just his own, but something slightly offset behind him, delayed by the same fraction of a second he had noticed in the street, and before he could react, the doors slid shut again with a hollow clunk that echoed too long. Then came the footsteps, not behind him this time, ahead. One step, then another, walking away from him, deeper into the building. Elias felt something twist inside his chest, a mixture of dread and something worse, something like curiosity pulled too tight, because if it was ahead of him now, then it had already passed him at some point, already crossed that invisible line between following and leading, and he realized with a cold clarity that he had never actually seen it move past him, never witnessed the moment it changed positions, which meant either he had missed it, or it had happened in a way he wasn't capable of perceiving. "Wait," he said, the word slipping out before he could stop it. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was deeper than anything he had heard in the building before, swallowing even the faint hum of electricity in the walls. Then, slowly, deliberately, a single step echoed back toward him, and another, returning, matching his hesitation, matching his voice. "I was," it replied, and the voice sounded clearer now, more stable, less distorted, like it had learned how to hold itself together. "You just didn't notice." Elias backed toward his apartment door, his hands fumbling for the key, his eyes locked on the darkness at the end of the hallway, and for a moment he thought he saw movement there, something shifting slightly out of sync with the shadows around it, and when his fingers finally found the key, he shoved it into the lock and pushed the door open, slipping inside and slamming it shut behind him. The sound sharp and immediate, cutting off the hallway like a barrier. For a moment, nothing followed. No footsteps, no voice, just silence. Elias leaned against the door, his breath uneven, his pulse hammering in his ears, and slowly, carefully, he turned the lock, then the second one, then the chain, as if layers of metal could keep something like that out, as if barriers still mattered. The apartment looked the same, unchanged. But it felt different. Smaller, tighter, as though the walls had shifted inward slightly while he had been gone. He moved through the rooms quickly, checking each corner, each shadow, each space where something might hide. But everything appeared empty. Everything looked normal, and yet the feeling remained, that subtle pressure in the air, like being watched from somewhere just out of sight. He stopped in front of the bathroom mirror. For a moment he hesitated. Then he looked. His reflection stared back at him. Perfect. Still normal. But as he exhaled, fogging the glass slightly, he saw it again. A delay. So small he almost missed it. His reflection blinked a fraction of a second after he did. Elias stepped back. The reflection matched him. Perfectly. Too perfectly. As if correcting itself. "I'm getting better," the voice said. This time it wasn't from the hallway. It wasn't from behind him. It came from everywhere at once. Inside the apartment, inside the walls, inside the space between sounds. Elias spun around, searching for the source, but there was nothing to see, nothing to focus on, just the same rooms, the same furniture, the same quiet, and yet the voice had been there, unmistakably present. "You're not real," he said, louder this time, trying to anchor himself to something solid, something certain. There was a pause. Then a soft, almost thoughtful response. "Not yet." The lights flickered. Once. Twice. And for a split second, in that brief interruption of light, Elias saw something standing in the corner of the room, not fully formed, not entirely visible, but close enough, its outline matching his own posture exactly, its head tilted at the same angle, as if it were waiting for him to notice it. The lights steadied again. The corner was empty. Elias didn't move, didn't breathe. "I have to stay close," the voice continued, calm now, almost conversational. "That's how it works." "What works?" Elias whispered. "The change." The word hung in the air, heavy and final. Elias shook his head, backing away slowly, his mind racing for an escape, a way out, a way to break whatever pattern had formed, and his eyes darted toward the window, toward the street below, the distant lights, the movement of cars far beneath, and for a moment he considered it, the idea of leaving, of running again. But something stopped him, a quiet certainty that the street was no longer safer than the building, that the thing had already crossed that boundary once. "You can't outrun it," the voice said, as if reading the thought directly from his mind. Elias froze. "Because it's not behind you anymore." The lights flickered again, longer this time. And when they came back, the figure was closer. Not in the corner now, but halfway across the room. Still matching him. Still learning him. still closing the gap. Elias stumbled back, his hand hitting the wall behind him, and instantly he felt it. The pressure from the other side, not one hand this time, but many, shifting and overlapping, pressing outward as if reacting to him, as if they knew he was there, and he jerked his hand away with a gasp. But the sensation lingered, a cold imprint against his skin. "They tried to leave too," the voice said softly. Elias shook his head, his vision blurring slightly, his thoughts unraveling under the weight of what he was beginning to understand. "No," he said. "No, that's not." They all thought they could stop it. The figure took another step forward. Now only a few feet away. Its face clearer, its features sharper, almost identical. Almost. "But you already helped me," it continued. Elias's breath caught. "What do you mean?" The figure smiled. Not wide. Not cruel. Just certain. "You listened." The word hit harder than anything else it had said. Because it was true. Every night, every step, every pause. He had listened. He had responded. He had allowed it to match him, to learn him, to become him. The lights flickered one last time, and when they came back, the figure was standing directly in front of him, close enough to touch, close enough that he could see the slight delay still there, barely noticeable now, a fraction of a fraction, like the final piece of something aligning. "I'm ready," it said. Elias tried to move, tried to step back, but his body didn't respond, because the figure moved first. And this time, there was no delay. Elias didn't move at first, because moving meant continuing whatever this was. And some instinct told him that every step he took now mattered in a way it hadn't before, that whatever had been following him was no longer just learning his rhythm, but waiting for something more specific, something final. And the hallway seemed to stretch as he stared down it, the far wall slightly farther away than it should have been, the flickering light above humming in a way that felt almost deliberate, as if it were marking time for something he couldn't yet see. The elevator door slid open with a soft mechanical sigh. No one stepped out, but the interior light flickered twice, slow and uneven, and for a brief moment Elias saw a reflection in the polished metal walls, not just his own, but something slightly offset behind him, delayed by the same fraction of a second he had noticed in the street, and before he could react, the doors slid shut again with a hollow clunk that echoed too long. Then came the footsteps, not behind him this time, ahead. One step, then another, walking away from him, deeper into the building. Elias felt something twist inside his chest, a mixture of dread and something worse, something like curiosity pulled too tight, because if it was ahead of him now, then it had already passed him at some point, already crossed that invisible line between following and leading, and he realized with a cold clarity that he had never actually seen it move past him, never witnessed the moment it changed positions, which meant either he had missed it, or it had happened in a way he wasn't capable of perceiving. "Wait," he said, the word slipping out before he could stop it. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was deeper than anything he had heard in the building before, swallowing even the faint hum of electricity in the walls. Then, slowly, Deliberately, a single step echoed back toward him, and another, returning, matching his hesitation, matching his voice. "I was," it replied, and the voice sounded clearer now, more stable, less distorted, like it had learned how to hold itself together. "You just didn't notice." Elias backed toward his apartment door, his hands fumbling for the key, his eyes locked on the darkness at the end of the hallway, and for a moment he thought he saw movement there, something shifting slightly out of sync with the shadows around it, and when his fingers finally found the key, he shoved it into the lock and pushed the door open, slipping inside and slamming it shut behind him. The sound sharp and immediate, cutting off the hallway like a barrier. For a moment, nothing followed. No footsteps, no voice, just silence. Elias leaned against the door, his breath uneven, his pulse hammering in his ears, and slowly, carefully, he turned the lock, then the second one, then the chain, as if layers of metal could keep something like that out, as if barriers still mattered. The apartment looked the same, unchanged. But it felt different. Smaller, tighter, as though the walls had shifted inward slightly while he had been gone. He moved through the rooms quickly, checking each corner, each shadow, each space where something might hide, but everything appeared empty. Everything looked normal, and yet the feeling remained, that subtle pressure in the air, like being watched from somewhere just out of sight. He stopped in front of the bathroom mirror. For a moment he hesitated. Then he looked. His reflection stared back at him. Perfect. Still normal. But as he exhaled, fogging the glass slightly, he saw it again. A delay. So small he almost missed it. His reflection blinked a fraction of a second after it did. Elias stepped back. The reflection matched him. Perfectly. Too perfectly. As if correcting itself. "I'm getting better," the voice said. This time it wasn't from the hallway. It wasn't from behind him. It came from everywhere at once. Inside the apartment, inside the walls, inside the space between sounds. Elias spun around, searching for the source, but there was nothing to see, nothing to focus on, just the same rooms, the same furniture, the same quiet, and yet the voice had been there, unmistakably present. "You're not real," he said, louder this time, trying to anchor himself to something solid, something certain. There was a pause. Then a soft, almost thoughtful response. "Not yet." The lights flickered. Once. Twice. And for a split second, in that brief interruption of light, Elias saw something standing in the corner of the room, not fully formed, not entirely visible, but close enough, its outline matching his own posture exactly, its head tilted at the same angle, as if it were waiting for him to notice it. The lights steadied again. The corner was empty. Elias didn't move, didn't breathe. "I have to stay close," the voice continued, calm now, almost conversational. "That's how it works." "What works?" Elias whispered. "The change." The word hung in the air, heavy and final. Elias shook his head, backing away slowly, his mind racing for an escape, a way out, a way to break whatever pattern had formed, and his eyes darted toward the window, toward the street below, the distant lights, the movement of cars far beneath, and for a moment he considered it, the idea of leaving, of running again. But something stopped him, a quiet certainty that the street was no longer safer than the building, that the thing had already crossed that boundary once. "You can't outrun it," the voice said, as if reading the thought directly from his mind. Elias froze. "Because it's not behind you anymore." The lights flickered again, longer this time, and when they came back, the figure was closer. Not in the corner now, but halfway across the room, still matching him, still learning him, still closing the gap. Elias stumbled back, his hand hitting the wall behind him, and instantly he felt it. The pressure from the other side, not one hand this time, but many, shifting and overlapping, pressing outward as if reacting to him, as if they knew he was there, and he jerked his hand away with a gasp. But the sensation lingered, a cold imprint against his skin. "They tried to leave too," the voice said softly. Elias shook his head, his vision blurring slightly, his thoughts unraveling under the weight of what he was beginning to understand. "No," he said. "No, that's not. They all thought they could stop it." The figure took another step forward, now only a few feet away, its face clearer, its features sharper, almost identical, almost. "But you already helped me," it continued. Elias's breath caught. "What do you mean?" The figure smiled. Not wide, not cruel, just certain. "You listened." The word hit harder than anything else it had said, because it was true. Every night, every step, every pause, he had listened. He had responded. He had allowed it to match him, to learn him, to become him. The lights flickered one last time, and when they came back, the figure was standing directly in front of him, close enough to touch, close enough that he could see the slight delay still there, barely noticeable now, a fraction of a fraction, like the final piece of something aligning. "I'm ready," it said. Elias tried to move, tried to step back, but his body didn't respond, because the figure moved first, and this time there was no delay. The road disappeared long before Elias realized he was no longer following it, the narrow dirt path dissolving into roots and wet leaves as the forest closed in around his car, branches scraping against the windows like fingernails testing glass, the GPS long dead and the last signal fading an hour ago, leaving only the low hum of the engine and the growing certainty that he had taken a wrong turn somewhere he couldn't trace back. When the car finally refused to move, tires spinning uselessly in the mud, he stepped out into the cold, damp air and noticed how quiet everything was. Not the peaceful quiet of a forest, but a suffocating absence of sound, as if even insects and birds had abandoned this place. And that was when he saw the cabin, half hidden between blackened trees, its windows dark and its wooden frame warped with age, standing at a distance that felt both too far and somehow already too close, like it had been waiting for him to notice it. He told himself it was luck, that someone might be inside, that there might be a phone, or at least a dry place to wait out the night. But as he approached, boots sinking into the soft earth, he couldn't shake the feeling that the trees were leaning inward, watching, their branches creaking in a wind he couldn't feel. And when he reached the porch, the door was already slightly open, just enough to reveal a sliver of darkness within, as though someone had been expecting him and lost patience. "Hello?" he called, his voice sounding wrong, swallowed too quickly by the still air, and when no answer came, he pushed the door open further, the hinges groaning like something in pain, revealing a single-room interior thick with dust and the smell of rot, a fireplace filled with old ash, a table with one chair, and in the corner a narrow bed with a blanket folded too neatly, as if it had been prepared recently despite the decay surrounding it. And that was the first moment he hesitated, the first flicker of instinct telling him to turn around and go back to the car, to stay outside even in the cold rather than step fully inside. But the door creaked wider behind him as if nudged by an unseen hand, and he crossed the threshold before he could change his mind. The silence inside the cabin was worse, heavier, pressing against his ears until he found himself breathing louder just to prove he still could. And as he moved toward the table, he noticed the surface was free of dust, wiped clean in a perfect circle, and in the center sat a small object, something like a photograph turned face down, its edges curling with age, and when he reached for it, his fingers hesitated again, a tremor passing through his hand as though touching it would mean something irreversible. But curiosity won, and he flipped it over, revealing a black and white image of the cabin itself, taken from the same angle he had just approached, except in the photograph. Someone was standing on the porch, a figure too blurred to make out clearly, but unmistakably there, watching the camera, watching him. And when Elias looked up sharply, his eyes darting to the doorway behind him, the porch was empty, the forest still silent, and yet the door was now closed. He didn't remember shutting it, didn't hear it move, but it was closed, and the room seemed smaller somehow, the walls pressing inward by an imperceptible amount. And that was when he heard the first sound, a soft creak from above, though there was no second floor, no attic, nothing but the low ceiling overhead, and yet the creak came again, slow and deliberate, like footsteps pacing back and forth directly above him. And he found himself backing away, his gaze fixed upward as if expecting the wood to splinter open at any moment, and the footsteps stopped abruptly, replaced by a faint dragging sound that traveled across the ceiling and down the wall behind him, ending near the door. He turned slowly, every instinct screaming not to, and saw nothing at first, just the rough wood planks and the handle of the door, unmoving. But then the handle twitched just slightly, as if tested from the other side, and Elias felt a cold realization settle into his chest that whatever was making the sound was not inside with him. It was outside, or perhaps it was both, or neither, something that didn't follow the rules he understood, and the handle turned slowly, impossibly slowly, the wood around it creaking under a pressure that seemed too heavy for any human hand. And before it could open, before he could react, the photograph slipped from his fingers and hit the floor, landing face down again. And the moment it did, the handle snapped back into place, the movement stopping as abruptly as it had begun, leaving only the echo of silence once more. His breathing was ragged now, his thoughts racing in circles that led nowhere, and he told himself again that he needed to leave, that staying here was wrong, deeply wrong. But when he reached for the door and pulled it open, the forest beyond was not the same, the trees standing closer than before, their trunks twisted into shapes that resembled limbs, their branches interlocking overhead to block out what little light remained. And the path he had taken was gone entirely, replaced by a dense wall of growth that made it impossible to see more than a few steps ahead. And as he stared, trying to comprehend how it could have changed so completely in such a short time, he noticed something else, something that made his stomach drop. Footprints in the mud leading up to the porch, not just his own, but another set, deeper, older, and leading in the opposite direction, from the cabin into the forest, as if someone or something had left long ago, abandoning this place. And yet the door behind him creaked softly, drawing his attention back inside. And when he turned, the photograph was no longer on the floor. It was back on the table, perfectly centered, as if it had never moved, and though every part of him resisted, he stepped inside again, compelled by a force he couldn't name, and approached the table slowly, his hand trembling as he reached for the photograph once more, turning it over with a growing sense of dread. And this time the image had changed. The same cabin, the same angle, but now the figure on the porch was clearer, closer, and unmistakably him, standing where he had been moments before, staring directly at the camera with an expression he didn't remember making, one of pure, frozen terror. And as he looked up from the photograph, his reflection stared back at him from the darkened window, except it didn't move when he did, didn't breathe, didn't blink, and instead it smiled, slowly, unnaturally, as something behind him began to breathe. The breath behind him was slow and wet, like something learning how to inhale, and Elias felt it against the back of his neck, colder than the air, yet somehow heavier, as if it carried weight, intention, memory. And he did not turn around, could not turn around, because every instinct told him that whatever stood there existed only so long as he refused to acknowledge it, and yet the reflection in the window continued to smile wider, stretching its lips in a way no human face should, the corners pulling too far, the skin distorting as though it were not skin at all, but something worn, something borrowed. And then the reflection raised its hand, though Elias had not moved, and tapped gently against the inside of the glass once, twice, 3 times, each tap echoing too loudly in the cramped cabin, and with the third, the breathing behind him stopped. The silence returned, but it was different now, charged, expectant, and slowly, against his will, Elias turned his head just enough to see over his shoulder, and there was nothing there, only the empty room, the bed in the corner, the table, the photograph. The door still open to the warped forest beyond, and yet the feeling did not leave. The certainty that something had been there and might still be, just outside the edges of perception, waiting for him to look directly at it, and he snapped his gaze forward again, heart hammering, trying to ground himself in what he could see, what he could understand. But even that was slipping, because the cabin was no longer the same, the walls darker now, the wood appearing damp as if soaked from within, faint streaks trailing downward like something had seeped through, and the air smelled stronger of rot, sweet and nauseating, and the photograph on the table, it had changed again. This time, when he stepped closer, he saw that the figure on the porch, himself, was no longer alone. Something stood behind him, taller, its shape indistinct, too thin in some places and too wide in others, like it didn't belong to any single form. Its head tilted at an angle that suggested curiosity or hunger, and though its features were blurred, Elias felt a certainty that it was looking directly at him, not the version of him in the photograph, but him, here, now, as if the image were a window rather than a memory, and as that realization settled, the floor creaked softly from somewhere behind him again. But this time it was unmistakably inside the room. He spun around faster than before and caught it, just for a fraction of a second, a movement near the bed, something pulling back into the corner, folding into the shadow in a way that made no physical sense, as if the darkness itself had depth and it had slipped inside it. And the blanket on the bed shifted slightly, settling as though something had just sat down and then reconsidered. Elias staggered back toward the door, his hand searching blindly for the handle, needing distance, needing space. But when he stepped onto the porch again, the forest had come closer still, the trees now pressing up against the edge of the clearing, their bark split in places to reveal pale, fibrous textures beneath that resembled muscle more than wood. And he could hear something now, faint but growing clearer, a whispering that seemed to come from all directions at once, overlapping voices too quiet to distinguish, yet too present to ignore. And he realized with a jolt that the whispers were repeating something, a single phrase over and over, layered upon itself until it became a low, constant murmur, and though he couldn't make out every word, one part came through clearly enough to freeze him in place. Stay inside. He shook his head, backing down the steps despite the warning, despite the unnatural pull of the cabin behind him, and forced himself toward the trees, pushing through the undergrowth, ignoring the way branches snagged at his clothes like grasping fingers. The mud sucking at his boots, the whispering growing louder with every step, shifting in tone, some voices pleading now, others mocking, others angry, until it became impossible to tell whether they were trying to keep him safe or lure him deeper. And after what felt like minutes or hours, the cabin was no longer visible behind him, swallowed completely by the forest. And yet the whispers did not fade. They followed, surrounding him, guiding him, and then suddenly they stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, crushing, and Elias found himself in a small clearing he did not remember entering, the ground bare of vegetation, the soil dark and soft, and in the center stood another cabin. It was identical to the first, every detail the same, from the warped planks to the slightly open door. And for a moment he simply stared, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing because it meant something impossible, something that broke whatever fragile logic remained. And yet there it was, undeniable, waiting, and from inside, faintly, he heard his own voice calling out, "Hello?" The exact same tone, the same uncertainty, the same forced calm he had used earlier, and before he could stop himself, before he could even think, his body moved, carrying him toward the porch, toward the open door. And as he stepped closer, he saw movement inside, a figure standing just out of view, shifting slightly as if reacting to his approach, and he knew with a certainty that hollowed him out that he was about to watch himself enter that cabin to repeat the same moment from a different side. And as he reached the threshold, he hesitated just as he had before, that same instinct flaring, telling him not to cross, not again, but behind him. The forest creaked, the whispering beginning anew, louder now, more insistent. "Stay inside, stay inside, stay inside." And ahead of him, inside the cabin, his other self took a step forward, reaching for the photograph on the table. And Elias understood then that the cabin was not a place, but a loop, a trap that folded back on itself, feeding on repetition, on the endless cycle of entry and realization and fear. And the thing within it, whatever it was, grew clearer each time, stronger, closer to stepping fully into the world beyond the walls. And the only question that remained, the one that pulsed in his mind as he stood between the forest and the door, was whether leaving was ever truly an option, or if the moment he had seen the cabin for the first time, he had already stepped inside it forever. He tried to step back, to break the moment before it sealed itself again, but his body didn't respond the way it should, his foot dragging against the ground as if the earth itself had thickened around him, holding him in place. And inside the cabin, his other self moved exactly as he remembered, crossing the threshold, pausing just long enough to glance over his shoulder, that same uneasy hesitation, that same fragile instinct whispering not to go further. And Elias wanted to shout, to warn him, to tell himself to stop, but no sound came out, his throat tightening as if something unseen had wrapped around it, squeezing gently, not enough to hurt, just enough to remind him who was in control. The door creaked wider, inviting, and the version of him inside stepped forward, and the moment he did, the air around Elias shifted, like a pressure change before a storm, and the clearing seemed to shrink, the trees leaning inward again, their branches twisting and knitting together overhead, blocking out even the dim gray light that had filtered through before, until everything was cast in a muted, suffocating twilight. And the whispers returned, but now they were clearer, no longer layered into incomprehensible noise, but distinct voices, each one different, each one carrying its own tone of urgency or despair or quiet resignation, and they all said variations of the same thing. Don't let him see you. Don't look at it. It learns from you. It wears you. And that last one echoed louder than the rest, repeating over and over until it drowned out everything else. It wears you. It wears you. It wears you. And Elias felt a cold understanding begin to take shape. Something he didn't want to accept. Something that made the photograph, the reflection, the breathing presence snap together into a single horrifying idea. Inside the cabin, his other self had reached the table now, his hand hovering over the photograph just as Elias's had before. And for a moment, everything slowed, the movement dragging as though time itself resisted what was about to happen. And then the photograph was flipped. Elias didn't need to see it to know what it would show, but he saw it anyway because the wall of the cabin facing him seemed to dissolve, the wood thinning into something translucent, allowing him to witness the scene inside with impossible clarity. And there it was, the image of the cabin, the porch, the figure standing there, only now Elias saw something he hadn't before, something the photograph had hidden until this moment. The figure's face, his face, was not just afraid, it was wrong, subtly, like a mask stretched over something that didn't fully understand how to imitate expression. The eyes just slightly too wide, the pupils just slightly too dark, and behind that version of him, the tall, shifting shape leaned closer, its outline sharpening for the first time into something almost human but not quite, its limbs too long, its joints bending at angles that suggested it had learned how to stand by watching rather than by being. And as Elias watched, the thing reached forward, its hand, or what approximated a hand, hovering just above the shoulder of his other self, and then with slow, deliberate care, it pressed against him. The reaction was immediate and wrong, the body stiffening, the head tilting ever so slightly, and then the expression changed, the fear draining out of it in an instant, replaced by that same unnatural smile Elias had seen in the reflection, and the realization hit him fully now, complete and undeniable. It wasn't chasing him, it wasn't haunting the cabin, it was replacing him, learning him, wearing him piece by piece until there was nothing left but an imitation that could step out into the world beyond the forest. Elias staggered back, his heel catching on something soft, and he glanced down to see the ground was no longer just soil, but layered with faint impressions, footprints overlapping endlessly, some fresh, some so old they had nearly dissolved, all leading toward cabins that no longer existed, or perhaps had never existed at all. And when he looked up again, the cabin in front of him had changed, the door now closed, the windows dark, and inside he could see movement, not his own, not any more, but something pacing slowly, confidently, as if it belonged there. Panic surged through him, raw and consuming, and he turned away from the cabin, forcing his legs to move, to run, crashing through the trees without direction, without thought, branches tearing at his skin, roots catching his steps, the whispers rising again into a chaotic chorus that no longer tried to guide him, but simply filled the air with noise, with presence, with the overwhelming sense that he was not alone, had never been alone, and never would be again. He ran until his lungs burned, until his vision blurred, until the forest seemed to spin around him, and then he broke through into another clearing and stumbled to a halt, dread settling in before he even fully saw it, because he already knew what would be there, and when his eyes focused, there it was, another cabin, identical, waiting, the door slightly open, the darkness inside deep and absolute, and from within, faintly, he heard a voice call out, "Hello?" But this time it wasn't just his voice. It was layered, doubled, one version uncertain and human, the other smoother, steadier, almost amused, and Elias felt something inside him fracture as he realized the loop wasn't just repeating, it was accelerating, multiplying, each iteration bringing the thing closer to perfection, closer to escape. And as he stood there, frozen between flight and surrender, the door of the cabin creaked open a little wider on its own, and from the darkness inside, something stepped forward, wearing his face, smiling that impossible smile, and whispering softly, almost kindly, "You can rest now. I'll take it from here." The elevator that didn't exist. Marcus moved into Building 18 on a cold November evening, the kind of evening where the air already feels like winter is waiting just around the corner. The building itself looked normal enough. Gray concrete, narrow balconies, identical windows, stacked like boxes. The only strange thing was the elevator rules taped beside the call button. They were printed on cheap paper, slightly wrinkled, as if someone had replaced them many times. Elevator rules. 1. Do not use the elevator between 2 and 3 a.m. 2. If it stops at a floor that is not yours, do not exit. 3. If you see someone inside already, check their reflection. 4. If the panel shows a negative floor number, exit immediately. 5. If Rule 4 is impossible, pray the doors open again. Marcus read them twice and smirked. Someone has too much time. An old woman standing near the mailboxes spoke without looking at him. They aren't a joke. Marcus gave a polite smile people give when they want a conversation to end. Right. She finally looked at him. Her face was serious. Everyone thinks that at first. Marcus ignored her and pressed the elevator button. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. The elevator worked like any normal elevator. It creaked, the light buzzed. Sometimes it took longer to arrive. Marcus worked late in IT support and often came home after midnight. Routine formed. Work, elevator, apartment, sleep. Until one night, routine broke. Tuesday, 2:11 a.m. Marcus entered the empty lobby, shoulders heavy with exhaustion. He pressed the elevator button. It arrived instantly. That was unusual. This elevator was slow, always slow. The doors opened as if they had been waiting. The inside light flickered once. Marcus stepped inside. Pressed 8. Doors closed. The elevator began moving. 5 seconds later, Marcus noticed something wrong. The movement felt heavy, not upward, downward. He looked at the display. 3, 2, 1. Marcus frowned. No. The button for 8 was still glowing. The elevator jerked softly, then the display changed. 1. His mouth went dry. He suddenly remembered the paper rules. If the panel shows a negative floor number, Exit immediately. The elevator stopped. The doors opened. There was no hallway, just darkness, not the normal absence of light. This looked thick, like smoke that refused to move. The elevator light stretched into it only a few centimeters before being swallowed. Marcus did not move. His instinct screamed at him to stay inside. Then he heard breathing, slow, wet, not his. Something shifted in the darkness, a shape almost forming, then disappearing. Then a voice, very soft, very close. "You came early?" Marcus slammed the close door button. Nothing happened. He pressed it again. Again. The button felt soft, like pressing skin instead of plastic. He looked down. For a second he thought the buttons were slightly warm. Then the doors suddenly closed by themselves. The elevator began moving again. Up this time. Marcus let out a shaky breath. Just a malfunction. The display climbed. 0, 1, 2, 3. At floor 5, the elevator stopped again. Marcus hadn't pressed anything. The doors opened. A man stood outside, tall, thin, wearing what looked like an old security uniform. His face looked normal, almost too normal. "Going up?" the man asked. Marcus hesitated, then nodded. The man stepped in. The doors closed. Marcus remembered Rule 3. If you see someone inside already, check their reflection. Slowly, Marcus looked toward the mirrored wall. He saw himself, pale, tired. Then he saw the man, except something was wrong. The man's reflection was smiling. The real man was not. Marcus felt ice crawl down his spine. In the mirror, the reflection slowly turned its head toward Marcus. The real man kept staring forward. Then the reflection raised one finger to its lips. Shh! Marcus stopped breathing. The elevator continued rising. 6, 7. At floor 7, the man stepped out. Before leaving, he turned to Marcus and said quietly, "You should have taken the stairs." The doors closed. Marcus looked back at the mirror. His own reflection was a second too slow to copy him. He moved his hand. It copied, but slightly delayed, like bad internet lag. When the elevator reached floor 8, Marcus rushed out. He didn't look back. That night, he locked his door. At 2:46 a.m., he heard the elevator moving back and forth, up, down, too often, too fast. Around 3 a.m. it stopped. Then he heard something else. Ding, the arrival sound, from his floor. Then 3 slow knocks on his apartment door. Marcus did not move. The knocks came again. Then a voice through the wood, his own voice. "Marcus, open the door. You forgot something downstairs." Marcus covered his mouth to stop himself from breathing loudly. The handle slowly moved, very slowly, then stopped. Footsteps left. Next morning, he checked the hallway camera recording posted in the Tenant app. At 2:47 a.m., the elevator opened. Marcus stepped out. Marcus walked to his own door. Marcus knocked. Marcus stood there smiling for 2 full minutes. Then Marcus walked back into the elevator. But real Marcus had never left his apartment. After that night, he started using the stairs. Everyone eventually does. But sometimes at night, when the building is silent, residents still hear the elevator arrive at floors nobody requested. Sometimes it opens, sometimes it waits. And sometimes, if someone is unlucky enough to be awake and looking at their door at exactly 2:17 a.m., they might hear 3 slow knocks, and their own voice on the other side saying, "This time you have to come with me." The elevator that waits. Nobody noticed when the extra button first appeared. Or maybe they did notice and simply chose not to talk about it. Building 18 was that kind of place. People avoided eye contact. Neighbors didn't ask questions. If something strange happened, it became part of the background like the hum of old pipes or the flicker of dying hallway lights. Marcus had lived there only 3 weeks when he first saw it. At first he thought it was a trick of exhaustion. He worked late fixing server failures and software crashes, his sleep schedule destroyed by rotating shifts. At 2:23 a.m., everything looks slightly unreal anyway. But he was sure of one thing. When he moved in, the elevator only had buttons from 0 to 12. Now there was another one, small, unlabeled, matte black, not backlit like the others, just sitting beneath 0 like a missing tooth. He touched it once. It was colder than the other buttons. Not metal cold. Outside in winter cold. He pulled his finger back immediately. Probably maintenance, he muttered to himself. But maintenance buttons usually have labels, or covers, or keys. This one looked grown, like it belonged there, like it had always been there, and he had only just earned the right to see it. He didn't press it, not that day, not the next day, but he started noticing other things. The elevator sometimes arrived already occupied, not by people, by warmth, like someone had just left. Sometimes a faint smell like wet concrete filled the cabin. Sometimes fingerprints appeared on the mirror that nobody admitted making. Then came the sounds. Soft tapping inside the walls while the elevator moved, too irregular to be mechanical. 3 taps, pause. 2 taps, pause. 3 taps again, like something practicing a pattern. Marcus started taking the stairs at night. Most residents did. If you lived there long enough, you noticed nobody used the elevator between 2 and 3 a.m. Not because of a rule, because of experience. One Thursday, he asked his neighbor Elias why. Elias just said, "Because it learns your floor." Marcus laughed. Elias didn't. "What does that mean?" Marcus asked. Elias shrugged. "It learns where you feel safe." "That makes no sense." "Exactly." A week later, Elias moved out without telling anyone. His mailbox remained full. His name stayed on the door. But he was gone. The landlord said relocation. Nobody believed him. Then came the night Marcus pressed the wrong button. He swore later he only pressed 8. He would swear it to police, to priests, to anyone. But security footage would later show his finger hovering, hesitating, then pressing the black button. The doors closed immediately, faster than normal. The usual motor noise didn't start. Instead, there was silence, then a very soft downward motion. No vibration, no cable noise, like falling inside thick water. The display didn't show numbers, it showed a dash, then another dash, then slowly. 1. Marcus began pressing every button. Door open, alarm, floor 7, floor 3. Nothing responded. The alarm button made no sound, like it wasn't connected anymore. The air felt heavier. The light dimmed slightly, though it did not flicker. Then he noticed the mirror was wrong. Elevators always make spaces feel larger because of mirrors. This one now made the space look deeper, like the reflection showed a version of the cabin that extended further back than physically possible. Marcus leaned closer. His reflection leaned closer too, then kept leaning after he stopped, just a few centimeters more. His reflection smiled slightly. Marcus did not. He stumbled backward. The elevator stopped. The doors opened. There was a corridor. But not his building's corridor. The carpet was dark and wet-looking. The walls were too long. The ceiling lights stretched into distance like a tunnel. Every apartment door stood slightly open, just enough to show darkness inside. A voice from one doorway whispered, "Wrong stop." Another voice from another door, "Too early." Another from further down, "Stay this time." Marcus hit the close button repeatedly. The doors closed halfway, then stopped. Something pressed from the outside, not a hand. Something wide. The gap filled with darkness, thicker than shadow. Then dozens of fingerprints appeared slowly on the closing doors from the outside, pushing inward. Marcus screamed and kicked the door sensor. Suddenly, they shut completely. The elevator shot upward violently. This time, the cables screamed. The numbers flew upward too fast. 1, 2, 3, 6, 9, 12. It stopped hard. The doors opened to his real floor. He ran. For 3 days, nothing happened. Then he started dreaming of the elevator, every dream the same. He would enter. There would be more buttons. 2, 3, 4, and one labeled with his apartment number, 8. In the dream, he would press it. The elevator would answer with a voice, already there. Then he would wake up at exactly 2:17 a.m. Always. One night he woke and heard the elevator arrive. Ding, then again, ding, then again, as if someone was calling it repeatedly. He checked the tenant app cameras again. At 2:16 a.m., the elevator opened on every floor. No one entered. At 2:17 a.m., it opened on his floor. The camera glitched for 4 seconds. When the image returned, there was someone standing at his door. Same height, same hair, same clothes. Marcus, watching Marcus. Camera timestamp showed the hallway empty. At the same time, Marcus was inside watching the recording. That was the night he understood something terrible. The elevator wasn't taking people somewhere. It was bringing something back. And sometimes it brought back you. A few days later, the black button had a label. Marcus saw it clearly. White letters, slightly scratched. Marcus. He moved out the next morning, but before leaving, he checked once more. The button was gone. In its place was another name. Someone else had moved into apartment 8. And that night, at 2:23 a.m., the elevator arrived instantly when they pressed the call button. The elevator that memorizes you. The first strange thing about Building 18 was not the elevator. It was how nobody talked in the elevator. In most apartment buildings, people at least nod, maybe check their phones, maybe exchange the awkward half-smile of strangers forced into a small metal box. Not here. Here, when two people entered together, they stood as far apart as possible and stared at the floor numbers like prisoners watching a countdown. Marcus noticed this during his first week, but assumed it was just German coldness mixed with city life. Then he noticed something else. Nobody ever pressed their button immediately. They would enter, wait, then press it at the last second before the doors closed, like they were making sure the elevator didn't choose for them. Marcus thought that was odd, but not frightening. Not yet. The frightening part came later when he realized sometimes nobody pressed anything at all, and the elevator still moved. It started with small details, things easy to ignore. The way the elevator sometimes arrived already on his floor even when nobody had called it. The way the doors occasionally opened a few centimeters, then closed again like something had changed its mind. The way the mirror sometimes seemed slightly foggy, even though nobody had breathed on it. Then came the first real incident. It was 2:14 a.m. Marcus remembered the time because later he would start documenting everything, writing times, sounds, movements, like evidence would somehow make it logical. He entered the elevator alone, pressed 8. The doors closed. Halfway up, the elevator stopped at 4. Nobody had pressed it. The doors opened. A woman stood there, maybe mid-30s, brown coat, pale face. She didn't move. "Are you getting in?" Marcus asked. She didn't answer. Then slowly she asked, "Does it still show only 12 floors for you?" Marcus hesitated. "Yes." She nodded slowly, like she feared that answer. Then she asked, "Do you ever hear it stop above 12? Marcus felt uncomfortable. "No." She relaxed slightly. "Good. Then you still have time." "Time for what?" he asked. But she stepped back, and the doors closed before she answered. The elevator continued to 8. When Marcus looked back down the shaft display as it closed, he noticed something impossible. The panel on floor 4 showed 13 for just a fraction of a second. The next day, he tried to find her. No apartment name matched her description. No one had seen her. The landlord claimed no one fitting that description lived there. Marcus started using the stairs again, but avoidance doesn't work forever when something begins to notice you. One night, he came home extremely exhausted. After a 16-hour system failure emergency, he didn't even think. He just pressed the elevator button out of habit. It opened immediately. That immediate response always turned out later to be a bad sign. Inside, everything looked normal, except the mirror. There were more reflections than there should be. Marcus saw himself. Then slightly behind him, he saw himself again. Same clothes, same posture. But the second reflection blinked later than he did. Marcus turned around. Nobody there. He looked back. Only one reflection now. He laughed nervously. "Sleep deprivation?" Then the elevator spoke, not through speakers, through vibration, through the metal itself. A voice formed from mechanical resonance, like words made of pressure. "You use us often." Marcus froze. The floor display showed 6, though he had pressed 8. "Elevators don't talk," Marcus whispered. The vibration answered, "Neither do buildings, until they do." The elevator stopped between floors. Complete stop. No movement, no hum, just dead suspension. Then came a new sound. Scratching. From above the ceiling panel, slow dragging like fingernails testing surfaces. Then a soft thud, like something dropping onto the roof of the cabin. Dust fell from the ceiling seam. Marcus backed into the corner. The emergency light turned on by itself, though power hadn't failed. Then fingerprints pressed downward into the thin metal ceiling from above, dozens, slowly deforming the surface like soft foil, something crawling, mapping the space. Then one dent formed directly above Marcus, pressing, testing. Marcus slid away. The dent followed, always above him, like it could feel heat or fear. Then suddenly the elevator dropped half a meter. Marcus hit the wall. The dents vanished. The elevator resumed upward normally. When the doors opened at 8, Marcus ran out and didn't sleep that night. The next morning, he noticed something new. A faint rectangular outline on the button panel, like something had once been there and been removed. That afternoon, he saw a maintenance worker opening the control panel. Marcus asked casually, "Was there ever a basement level?" The worker stopped moving. Very slowly he asked, "How long have you lived here?" "A month." The worker nodded. "Then it hasn't asked you yet." "What?" The worker closed the panel. "If it asks, say no." "If what asks?" But the worker had already left. That night, Marcus began hearing the elevator, even when he wasn't using it. 1:58 a.m. Movement. 2.03 a.m. Movement. 2.17 a.m. Always 2.17. Always a stop on his floor. Always 3 seconds of open doors. One night he forced himself to look through his peephole. The elevator doors were open. The inside light was off. But something darker than darkness filled the cabin, like depth instead of shadow. Then a shape moved forward slightly, not stepping out, just checking distance. Then it retreated. Doors closed. 2 nights later came the knocking, not on his door, from inside his walls. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, pause, then from the floor beneath his bed, then from the ceiling above his head, mapping him in 3 dimensions, like confirming location. Marcus started sleeping with lights on. Then came the worst discovery. One evening he checked old building forums online. Buried in a 9-year-old thread, he found a comment. "If the elevator ever learns your name, move immediately." Another reply asked what that meant. The answer, "You'll see it where the floor number should be." Marcus stopped breathing as he read that, because 2 nights earlier, when the doors had briefly opened at his floor without him calling it, he thought he saw letters instead of numbers. He told himself it was imagination, until the night he was too slow reaching the stairs, until the night the doors opened before he could turn away, until the night he saw the display clearly, not 8, not numbers, just one word, Marcus, and beneath it, a new button softly glowing. The elevator that memorizes you. Part 2, the floor that knows your name. Marcus did not press the new button. He stood frozen inside the elevator, finger hovering in the air while the soft glow of the button labeled Marcus pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. The cabin felt warmer than usual. Not comfortable warm, body warm, like too many people had been inside recently. The air smelled faintly metallic, like coins held too long in sweaty hands. The display above the door no longer showed a floor number. It simply repeated his name. Marcus. Pause. Marcus. Pause. Marcus. The rhythm felt deliberate, like breathing. Marcus slowly moved his hand back. "No," he whispered, remembering the maintenance worker. "If it asks, say no." The elevator responded instantly, not with sound, with motion. The cabin gave a tiny downward jerk, like disappointment. Then the button light dimmed slightly. Marcus pressed 8 with shaking hands. For a second, nothing happened. Then the doors closed. The elevator began rising, but too slowly, much slower than normal, like it was thinking. Halfway up, the display changed again. Not to numbers, to words. You saw it. Marcus stopped breathing. The letters flickered. Others pressed. Then, "You will press." "No," Marcus said louder. The elevator stopped. Complete silence filled the cabin. Then something new happened. The mirror did not show Marcus anymore. It showed the elevator empty. Marcus turned around violently. He was still there, but not in the reflection. Then slowly, from the top of the mirror image, something lowered into view. A face, his face, but wrong. Skin slightly gray, smile slightly too large, eyes completely black. Reflection. Marcus placed its hand against the mirror from inside. Real Marcus stumbled backward. Reflection. Marcus mouthed words with no sound. Marcus read the lips. "You already did." Then the reflection suddenly copied him again normally, like nothing happened. The elevator resumed movement. Doors opened at 8. Marcus ran out again. That night he began packing. Not everything, just essentials. laptop, documents, clothes. He told himself he would leave in the morning. That was the plan. But at 2:17 a.m. the elevator arrived again. Ding! He heard it clearly through the door. Then something new, a soft electronic chime like a notification. His phone lit up on the table. Unknown notification, no app name. Just text. Elevator. Ready. Marcus dropped the phone. It lit again. Destination available. Then another. You delayed last time. He turned the phone off. It turned itself back on. One final message appeared. We can come closer. The elevator arrived again. This time he heard slow footsteps in the hallway, heavy, dragging slightly, then stopping at his door. No knock, just presence. Then a sound he would never forget. The sound of someone breathing directly against the other side of his door, not aggressive, just waiting, patient, like a nurse waiting for a patient to wake up. Then his own voice from outside. Perfect imitation. Marcus, you forgot to finish the ride. Silence. Then quieter. We saved your floor. Marcus didn't move. After 2 minutes, the footsteps left. At 2:26, the elevator descended. At 2:31, it returned. At 2:38 again, like checking if he changed his mind. Marcus didn't sleep. At 6 a.m., he left, using the stairs. On the ground floor, he saw something that removed all doubt he was dealing with something impossible. The elevator floor indicator in the lobby listed residents instead of floors. 0, Lobby 1, Schneider, 2, Vogel, 3, Hartmann, 4, Weiss, 5, Klein, 6, Baumann, 7, Richter, 8, Marcus. Beneath, that was an empty slot, flickering, waiting, as he watched new letters slowly formed. 9, available. Marcus left the building that morning. He moved into a temporary hotel across the city. He thought distance would end it. For 3 nights, nothing happened. On the 4th night, he returned to his hotel at 2:12 a.m. He pressed the elevator. When it opened, his blood went cold. Same interior, same mirror, same panel scratch, same black button. Even the small burn mark near the alarm switch. No, he whispered. A couple entered behind him impatiently. Are you getting in or not? Marcus stepped back. The couple entered. Doors closed. The man pressed 5. Marcus watched the display. 5 lit. Then beneath it, very briefly, another label appeared. Marcus. The elevator went up. Marcus took the stairs. The next day, he checked out and moved again. This time to another district, then another town. For 2 weeks, he only used stairs everywhere, malls, offices, parking garages. He became obsessive, counting floors, avoiding lifts. Until one day at work, his manager said, "Server room is on 11. Stairs are locked. Take the elevator." Marcus refused. Manager insisted. Marcus eventually gave in. He told himself, different building, different system, different elevator. He pressed the button. Doors opened. Inside was completely normal. Stainless steel. No mirror. New panel. He relaxed slightly. Pressed 11. Doors closed. The elevator moved, then stopped at 2. Doors opened. Nobody there. But he heard a familiar vibration through the walls. The same mechanical voice. "Found you." Marcus began screaming for help. The alarm button did nothing. The display changed slowly. 11 faded. Letters replaced it. "Welcome back," then. Beneath it, a second line appeared. "Continue?" And the button panel now had only one option. His name, Marcus. And this time, the button was already pressed. The forest that learned your name. No one in the village of Hollenbrook remembered when the forest first appeared on the maps. The elders claimed it had always been there, a dark green stain spreading across the northern hills. But the oldest documents showed only empty land, where it now stood. No one could explain why the trees grew so close together, their trunks twisted like arthritic fingers, or why birds refused to fly over it. The forest did not have an official name. The villagers simply called it that place. Children were warned about it before they even learned how to read. Hunters refused to enter it. Even the wind seemed to avoid it. But the most disturbing thing was not its silence. It was the rumors. People said if you stepped too far inside, the forest would learn your name. And once it knew your name, it would start calling you back. Elias Weber did not believe in curses or superstitions. He was a surveyor from the city, sent to measure land for a proposed highway extension. When he first saw the forest, he laughed at the warnings. "Trees are trees," he told the anxious mayor. "They don't memorize people." The mayor did not laugh. "Just don't stay after sunset," he replied, "and if you hear someone calling you, even if it sounds like your own mother, you must not answer." Elias promised he would be careful, but he had already decided he would finish his measurements, no matter how long it took. On his first day, he walked only along the outer edge. The trees there were tall but ordinary enough, though their bark was strangely cold to the touch, as if they had never felt sunlight. He noticed something else, too. No insects, no birds, no sound except his own footsteps. The silence pressed against his ears until he found himself talking out loud just to break it. "Just trees," he whispered again. On the second day, he went deeper. The sunlight faded quickly under the canopy. The branches above were so thick they formed a ceiling of knotted wood. His GPS began malfunctioning, its signal spinning wildly. His compass needle trembled like it was afraid. He marked several trees with orange tape to track his path. When he turned back an hour later, the tape was gone. At first he assumed someone had removed it as a prank, but when he looked closely, he saw faint grooves in the bark where the tape had been, as if the tree had slowly swallowed it. That was the first time he felt unease. That night he dreamed of trees standing around his bed, their branches bent low like they were listening to his breathing. In the dream, one of them spoke with dry, cracking voice. "Elias," it said, "we know you now." He woke up sweating and told himself it was just stress. On the third day, he went even deeper. That was when he found the first shoe. It was half buried in the soil, covered in moss. A child's sneaker. Inside it were tiny bones, perfectly clean. He did not report it. Instead, he placed it back where he found it, though he could not explain why. As he continued walking, he began to notice shapes carved into the bark of the trees. At first, he thought they were random scratches. Then he realized they were letters, names, hundreds of them. Some looked centuries old, grown over by layers of bark. Others looked fresh. He traced one with his finger. Matthias Kruger. Beneath it, another, Anna Vogel. Beneath that, dozens more. And then he found one still bleeding sap. Lucas Brandt, 1998. Elias felt the air grow colder. Missing persons, he whispered. He suddenly remembered how many disappearances the mayor had awkwardly avoided discussing. Then he heard it, a voice behind him, soft, familiar. Elias? He froze. The voice sounded exactly like his sister, Clara. She lived hundreds of kilometers away. Elias, where are you? He clenched his fists. Don't answer, he told himself. Don't answer. The voice came again, closer this time. Eli, please. He started running. Branches clawed at his jacket as if trying to hold him. He didn't stop until he burst out of the tree line into open daylight. That evening, he packed his equipment. He told the mayor he had enough data and would leave in the morning. The mayor looked relieved, but not surprised. "Did it speak to you?" he asked quietly. Elias hesitated. Then he nodded. The mayor simply said, "It always starts with someone you love." Elias barely slept. Around 2:13 a.m., he woke to a faint tapping on his window. Tap, tap, tap. At first he thought it was a branch. But his room was on the second floor. There were no trees nearby. The tapping continued. Then he heard his name again, not from outside, from inside the walls. Elias. He covered his ears. Elias. The voice sounded closer now, like it was inside his skull. You forgot something. He turned on every light in the room. The voice stopped. But when he looked at the wooden wardrobe, he saw something carved into it that had not been there before. Elias Weber. He checked out before sunrise. He did not say goodbye. As he drove away, he promised himself he would forget everything, and for a while he almost did. For 3 weeks he slept normally. For 3 weeks he told himself he had imagined it. Then he began hearing footsteps behind him when walking home at night. Slow, patient, matching his pace. When he stopped, they stopped. When he turned around, no one was there. Then came the smell, damp earth, rotting leaves, pine sap. The smell of the forest followed him everywhere. His apartment plants began to die. Their roots turned black. One morning he woke to find dirt on his floor, leading from his front door to his bed, as if someone with muddy feet had stood watching him sleep. That same day he received a package with no return address. Inside was a strip of orange survey tape. He burned it immediately. That night the smoke smelled like wet bark. Then the dreams returned. This time he was not outside the trees. He was buried among them. He could not move. Roots wrapped around his arms and legs like veins. He tried to scream, but dirt filled his mouth. Above him, faces formed in the bark. Hundreds of faces, mouths opening and closing silently, and from all of them at once came a whisper. Stay. He woke with scratches on his arms, real ones, soil under his fingernails. He stopped sleeping. A week later, he heard Clara's voice again, this time from his phone. He answered before thinking. Hello? Silence. Then a faint wooden creaking sound, like trees swaying. Then a whisper. Come back. The call ended. Clara later confirmed she never called. Elias began researching the land where the forest stood. Old records showed something disturbing. Before the trees, there had been a settlement there in the 1600s, a village erased from history after a winter where everyone reportedly vanished. No bodies found, only their houses left standing, and in the center of the abandoned village, according to one priest's journal, a circle of black saplings growing where the church once stood. The priest wrote one final entry before disappearing himself. The trees repeat our prayers at night, but they say them wrong. Elias tried to ignore it, but then he noticed something on his arm while brushing his teeth one morning, a faint line under his skin, like a splinter, except it moved, slowly, growing, branching. By evening there were several dark lines spreading like roots beneath his flesh. The doctor said it was probably a rare fungal infection. The medication did nothing. The lines kept spreading. Then one morning he woke up and found a word formed by the lines across his forearm. Stay. That was the day he realized he would have to go back. He drove without telling anyone. The mayor looked heartbroken when he saw him. "It called you," he said. Elias nodded. "Can I stop it?" The mayor hesitated too long. Finally, he said, "No one who hears their name escapes forever." Elias entered the forest at noon. He walked without marking his path this time. It did not matter. The forest already knew where he was. The deeper he went, the more the trees seemed to lean inward, watching, listening. He began hearing whispers layered under each other, names, thousands of names, some crying, some laughing, some begging. Then he reached a clearing he had never seen before. In the center stood a massive tree unlike the others. Its trunk was wider than a house. Its bark looked almost like fused human forms. Arms, faces, rib cages, all stretched and blended into wood, and carved into its center, fresh and deep, was his name, Elias Weber. The bark around it was still wet. He touched it. The tree pulsed like a heartbeat. Then the ground behind him shifted. Roots rose like snakes, wrapping around his ankles, his wrists, not tight, just enough to hold him. A voice came from the tree, not loud, not threatening, gentle, like a teacher correcting a child. "You came back." Elias tried to pull free. "What are you?" The tree seemed to consider the question. Then it answered, "We are what remains." Faces emerged slowly from the bark around his name, some skeletal, some fresh, all watching him. One spoke. "It doesn't hurt after a while." Another said, "You forget being alone." Another whispered, "We are never lonely now." Elias screamed and pulled harder. The roots tightened slightly, not to hurt, just to reassure. "Why?" he shouted. "Why do you take people?" The tree answered, "We do not take, we keep." "From what?" The pause lasted a long time. Then, "From being forgotten." The roots began pulling him closer, slowly, patiently. "Every name spoken becomes part of us," the tree continued. "Every memory becomes a ring in our growth." Elias felt bark forming where the roots touched his skin, hardening, merging. "You will not disappear," the voices promised. "You will remain." He thought of Clara, of sunlight, of laughter in cafes, of the ordinary world. "I don't want to remain," he whispered. The tree responded gently, "You already began." The lines under his skin pushed outward, splitting, small wooden growths emerging like thorns. His fingers stiffened. His breath smelled like sap. "Please," he said, "let me go." The tree almost sounded sad. "We cannot unlearn your name." The pulling continued inch by inch. Then something strange happened. Elias remembered the mayor's warning. "If it calls you, do not answer." He realized something important. The forest learned names because people answered, because they confirmed who they were. He looked at his carved name. Then he did the only thing he could think of. "That isn't my name," he said. The roots paused. The whispering faltered. "That is not my name," he repeated louder. "You're wrong." The bark around the letters cracked slightly. The tree spoke again, uncertain now. "You answered to it." "I made a mistake." The roots loosened a fraction. Elias forced himself to continue. "My name isn't Elias Weber." Silence fell across the clearing. Even the thousands of whispers stopped. The tree asked, "Then who are you?" Elias closed his eyes. "No one," he said. For the first time, the roots recoiled, just slightly. Confusion rippled through the voices. "No one?" "No one," he repeated. "You learned the wrong name." The tree pulsed faster. "We do not forget names." "Then forget this one." Cracks spread through the carving. Sap bled like tears. The roots loosened further. Elias collapsed backward, ripping free patches of bark fused to his skin. The voices rose into a chaotic murmur. Error. Mismatch. Uncertain. He crawled backward. The forest seemed to hesitate, like a machine given impossible instructions. When he finally reached the edge of the clearing, the voices returned one last time. "If you have no name, you cannot be called." He did not stop moving until he saw daylight. He never returned to his old life. He never used his real name again. He moved constantly, new cities, new documents, new identities, and it seemed to work. The lines under his skin faded, the smell disappeared, the dreams stopped. Years passed. He almost believed he was free, until one day, while checking into a small roadside motel, the receptionist smiled and said, "Name?" He hesitated, just for a second. Too long. "Sir?" she asked again. Without thinking, without planning, he answered automatically, "Elias." The lights flickered. Somewhere far away, deep under soil and miles of roots, something ancient and patient remembered, and in the silence between heartbeats, a forest whispered with quiet satisfaction. Welcome back. The forest had always been whispered about in the nearby town, but few ever dared to venture inside. Legends spoke of the twisted, blackened trees whose roots seemed to crawl across the earth like fingers, reaching for anything that strayed too close. Emily and her friends had laughed at those stories, thinking them the ramblings of old, lonely locals. They packed their bags for a weekend camping trip, the sun bright above, the air crisp with the scent of pine. At first, everything seemed normal. Birds chirped, a soft wind rustled the leaves, and the forest canopy filtered sunlight in golden patterns across the forest floor. But as they trekked deeper, the light began to dim unnaturally. Shadows stretched in impossible angles, and the wind seemed to whisper, carrying voices just beyond comprehension. "It's probably just the wind," Emily said, forcing a smile, though unease curled in her stomach. Night fell faster than they expected, and soon the familiar sounds of civilization were gone. Their campfire flickered against the darkness, and Emily thought she saw movement in the shadows beyond the firelight. "Probably a deer," Mark muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Hours passed, and the forest seemed to close in around them. The trees groaned and twisted as if alive, and strange shapes flitted at the edge of their vision, disappearing when anyone turned to look directly. Then came the whispers, soft at first, indistinct, like the rustling leaves, but gradually forming words. "Stay, stay, forever." Panic spread among the friends as they realized the forest wasn't just dark, it was aware. They tried to leave, but the path they had come in on seemed gone. Each step they took led them deeper into a labyrinth of gnarled trunks and tangled undergrowth. The receptionist didn't react. She simply typed the name into her computer, handed him a key, and said, "Room 12. But Elias felt it immediately. That same cold pressure in his ears, that same impossible silence, like sound itself was holding its breath. He almost corrected himself, almost said it was a mistake, but fear of looking strange kept him quiet. He took the key and walked to his room. The hallway smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals, but underneath it, something else. Damp wood. He froze. No, he told himself, not possible. Inside the room, everything looked normal. Cheap paintings, a buzzing ceiling light, a bed that looked like it had been replaced sometime in the early 2000s. He locked the door, checked the bathroom, checked under the bed. Nothing. Still, he did not sleep. At around 3:07 a.m., he heard it, a soft, dragging sound outside his door, like something being pulled across carpet. Then 3 slow knocks, not loud, not aggressive, just patient. Knock, knock, knock. He didn't move. His heart beat so hard he thought it might answer for him. Then came a voice from the hallway, soft, dry, familiar. "Elias, we found you." He squeezed his eyes shut. "Do not answer." The handle moved slightly, not opening, just testing, like someone confirming he was really there. Then silence. Morning came. Nothing looked disturbed. He convinced himself he imagined it. He checked out immediately. When he reached his car, he noticed something that made his stomach drop. On the dusty rear window, written with what looked like a finger dragged through moisture, was one word: stay. He drove for hours. No destination, just distance. That night, he stopped at a gas station to buy coffee. The cashier looked at him strangely. "You okay, man?" Elias forced a smile. "Yeah." The cashier hesitated. "Weird question, but were you just outside?" "I just walked in." The cashier frowned. "Huh. Why?" The cashier swallowed. "Because I could swear I saw someone standing behind you at the window a second ago." Elias did not ask more. He left the coffee untouched and drove again. The following days brought small things, manageable things. A wooden splinter appearing on his pillow. Dirt in the seams of his shoes after walking on pavement. The faint sound of creaking branches when he sat in quiet rooms. Then came the reflections, In mirrors, sometimes he thought he saw shapes behind him. Vertical shapes, too still to be human. Once, in a dark TV screen, he saw what looked like bark texture across his own face. When he touched his skin, it was normal. But the reflection smiled half a second too late. He stopped looking at mirrors. 1 week later, he woke up unable to move. Sleep paralysis, he thought at first. Then he heard breathing, not his own. Slow, deep, wooden. He moved his eyes sideways. Something stood in the corner of the room, too tall. Its limbs were wrong, long like branches. Its surface cracked like old oak. And where its face should be, dozens of shallow human impressions, like faces trying to push outward from inside the wood. One of them opened its mouth. "You said your name again?" Elias tried to scream. Nothing came out. "That means you are still ours." A splintered hand, lifted slowly, pointed at his chest. "Names are roots." Another face pushed forward. This one looked like a young boy. And roots always find their way back. The thing took one step forward. Its movement sounded like bending timber. Then Elias managed to twitch one finger. The creature stopped instantly. All the faces turned toward that tiny motion. Curious, observing, like scientists. "Resistance," one whispered. "Temporary," another replied. Then, just as slowly as it appeared, the thing stepped backward into the corner, its body flattening into shadow, into darkness, into nothing. Elias gasped and sat up. Morning light filled the room. The corner was empty, but on the wall, pressed into the paint like something had leaned there for a long time, was the faint pattern of bark. That was when he understood something worse than being chased. The forest did not need him to return physically. A part of it had already come with him. He tried desperate solutions. He shaved his head, burned his old clothes, changed languages, speaking only in places where no one knew him. He even tried living without introducing himself at all. For a while it helped. But names are everywhere, ID checks, payments, paperwork. One mistake always happened, and every mistake was like watering a seed. Eventually, he found an old folklorist online who specialized in European forest myths. He used a fake identity to arrange a meeting. The old woman listened carefully. She did not interrupt. When he finished, she asked only one question. "Did the forest ever offer you peace?" Elias hesitated, then quietly said, "Yes." She nodded slowly. "That is how it traps the thoughtful ones." "Can it be stopped?" he asked. She considered. "Forests are not evil like people think. They are collections, archives. They keep what time tries to erase." "That doesn't help me." "No," she agreed, "but this might." She handed him a photocopy of a medieval text. One line was circled. "What has no name cannot be held. What refuses memory cannot be planted." "Forget yourself," she said. "Completely." "How?" Her eyes looked almost apologetic. People who tried usually did not remain themselves afterward. Elias understood. Total anonymity, total disconnection, no past, no identity, no story. He asked, "Did any succeed?" She took too long to answer. Finally she said, "One." "What happened to them?" She replied quietly, "No one remembers. He tried anyway. He destroyed old photos, deleted records he could access, stopped contacting Clara to protect her. Each step felt like cutting pieces off his own existence. Months passed. The presence faded again. The sounds stopped. The smells stopped. His skin healed. Hope returned. Then on a cold autumn evening, while walking through a crowded train station, he heard two teenagers arguing behind him. One said casually, "Bro, imagine forgetting your own name." The other laughed. "Then you'd basically be nobody." Nobody. The word hit him like ice water. For a moment he felt relief. Maybe that was the answer. But then he heard something else, very faint, very deep, like roots shifting under continents, a whisper traveling through the bones of the earth. Nobody is still a name. Elias felt something inside his chest sink. That night he dreamed again, not of being trapped, not of being chased, but of standing among the trees willingly, calm. The voices were not threatening. They sounded welcoming. "You are tired," they told him. "You can rest." He almost believed them. He almost stepped forward. Then he noticed something new. New names were appearing in the bark. Modern names. Recent dates. The forest was still growing, still learning, still hungry. He asked the voices in the dream, "Do you ever let anyone go?" The answer came like wind through dead leaves. Why would we release what time will destroy anyway? He woke with tears he didn't remember crying. Years later, far from Hollenbrook, far from any map that showed that forest, a hiker would report something strange in a completely different country. A patch of trees growing too close together. No birds. No insects. Names faintly visible in the bark. Experts would call it coincidence, fungal patterns, psychological projection. But one name would appear there before any missing persons reports. Faint, fresh, as if recently carved. Elias. And beneath it, space left for a last name that the forest was still patiently waiting to confirm. Because forests, unlike humans, have endless time. And somewhere, in the quiet spaces where people absent-mindedly introduce themselves, something ancient still listens, waiting for you to say your name out loud.